It was one of those scorching summer days when the air feels thick and heavy. The sun blazed in the sky, and I found myself home alone with my dad while my mom was away visiting her sister for the weekend. I remember feeling a mix of excitement at having some time with him, but also a bit of unease about what might unfold in the quiet house. As the day went on, my dad started to act differently, more playful than usual. We were joking around, and then he suggested we watch a movie together. "How about something a bit spicy?" he said with a sly grin. I laughed, thinking he was just joking, but there was a small part of me that wondered if there was more to it. We picked a romantic film, one with lots of tension and chemistry between the characters. I noticed my dad glancing at me during some of the steamy scenes, and my heart began to race. Was he actually enjoying this? I tried to keep my focus on the movie, but it was hard to ignore the feeling that he was looking at me in a way that made everything feel different. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door, and my heart skipped a beat. Who could it be? I looked at my dad, and he silently motioned for me to stay quiet. As I tiptoed toward the door, I could hear his breathing quicken behind me. I peeked through the window and saw Mrs. Thompson, our neighbor, holding a basket of cookies. I let out a quiet sigh of relief and opened the door. "Hi, I brought some cookies," she said with a warm smile. But as she stepped inside, I could feel a shift in my dad's mood. He became tense, and I could see him fidgeting. "Oh, thank you, Mrs. Thompson. Just what we needed," he said, his voice a little too upbeat. After she left, the air felt thick with unspoken tension. My dad looked at me, his expression a mix of desire and hesitation. "Do you ever wonder what it would be like if Mom wasn't here?" he asked, his eyes searching mine. My heart raced. Was he really asking what I thought he was? Before I could respond, he leaned in closer. "I know it's wrong, but I can't help how I feel," he whispered. The room felt charged, and my mind spun, overwhelmed with confusion and excitement. Was this real, or was I imagining things? Just as I was about to speak, my phone buzzed with a message. It was my mom, saying she'd be home sooner than expected. Panic flashed across my dad's face. "We have to act normal," he said quickly, pulling away, but the moment had already settled heavily between us. I felt the weight of temptation and the thrill of the unknown as we both tried to pretend nothing had changed. Deep down, though, I knew things were different. The air crackled with unspoken words, and every glance felt loaded with energy. When my mom finally returned, she walked in with a bright smile, completely unaware of the tension that had built between us. "What did you do while I was gone?" she asked, but both my dad and I could only manage nervous laughter. As the days passed, I couldn't shake the feeling of what had almost happened that day. I replayed those moments over and over, his look, the charged atmosphere, wondering if things would ever go back to normal. One evening, as we were watching TV together, I caught my dad glancing at me again, and my heart raced. I had a secret that was both exciting and terrifying to keep to myself. Would we ever address what had happened? The unknown hovered around us, leaving me curious and anxious about what might come next. Would this secret linger between us, or would it somehow bring us closer in a way that could change everything? Only time would tell. The weeks that followed felt surreal, as if some strange cloud hovered over our house, a secret neither of us could acknowledge. I found myself constantly replaying those moments, the way he had looked at me, the electricity in the air, and the confusion mixed with desire that swirled between us. One evening, while I was studying in my room, I heard my dad's laugh downstairs. Curious, I crept to the top of the stairs and peered down. He was sitting at the dining table with my mom, chatting and looking so normal. But I couldn't help but feel the weight of our shared secret pressing on me. Just then, my mom turned to me and called out, "Hey, do you want to join us for a game?" Her bright smile was infectious, but my heart was still racing from earlier. "Sure," I said, trying to sound casual as I walked downstairs. My dad glanced at me, and for a split second, our eyes locked. There was a flash of something, an understanding, maybe, that left me breathless. As we played, laughter filled the room, but I noticed my dad was acting more animated than usual. He leaned closer to me, his arm brushing against mine. Each time our skin touched, I felt a thrill run through me. Was he trying to rekindle that spark, or was I just imagining it? That night, after Mom went to bed, I found myself wandering into the living room. I hoped it would help me clear my head, but instead, I found my dad sitting on the couch, a glass of whiskey in hand, staring off into space. "Hey," I said softly, not wanting to disturb him. He looked up, surprised. "Oh, hey, I didn't think anyone would be up," he said warmly, though there was something deeper in his voice. "Can't sleep?" I asked, taking a seat across from him. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Just thinking about stuff," he said, pausing as his gaze shifted to the floor. "You know about that day." My heart raced again. "Yeah, me too," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady, but the tension was clear in the room. "I shouldn't have brought it up," he said suddenly, his tone serious. "It was a mistake." "Was it?" I asked, surprising myself with the boldness of the question. "I mean, it felt different." He looked at me, really looked at me. "It did, didn't it?" The air thickened between us, charged with the unsaid. Just as I was about to respond, my phone buzzed on the coffee table. I grabbed it, hoping the distraction would break the tension. It was a text from a friend, asking if I wanted to hang out. I hesitated, then texted back, "Sure, be there in a bit." "Going out?" my dad asked casually, though I noticed the flicker of disappointment in his eyes. "Just for a bit," I replied, standing up. "I'll be back soon." "Okay," he said, but I could tell he was a little sad. I left the house, feeling a mix of excitement and guilt, wondering if I was leaving something important behind. Later that night, after spending time with my friends, I returned home, still buzzing from the excitement. As I tiptoed into the living room, I found my dad sitting on the couch, a book in his hands. He looked up and gave me a warm smile. "Hey, how is it?" he asked, setting the book aside. "It was good," I said, sitting down next to him. "Miss me?" he teased lightly, but there was a certain look in his eyes that made my heart race. "Maybe a little," I replied, nervously biting my lip. He chuckled quietly, but there was something deeper in his laugh that sent a flutter through me. "I missed you too." Just then, a knock at the door startled us both. My pulse quickened as we exchanged uneasy glances. "Who could that be?" I asked, but before my dad could respond, he stood up to check. As he opened the door, I heard Mrs. Thompson's cheerful voice. "Hi, thought I'd drop by again," she said, holding out another batch of cookies. I sighed quietly, feeling that special moment between my dad and me slipping away. He smiled at her, but his gaze flickered back to me, and I couldn't help but wish she'd leave, so we could pick up where we left off. After she left, the tension was back in the air. I turned to my dad, feeling a burst of courage. "What were we talking about before?" I asked, locking eyes with him. He hesitated, swallowing hard. "I'm not sure if we should be talking about this." "Why not?" "It's already out there," I pressed, feeling the heat rise in my cheeks. He leaned back into the couch, his expression serious. "Okay, but promise me something. Whatever we say, we keep it between us. Nobody else can know." "I promise," I said, my heart pounding with a mix of anticipation and nervousness. He exhaled, looking directly at me. "There's something between us. I don't know how to explain it, but it's real." My breath caught in my throat. "I feel it too," I admitted, surprising myself with how honest I was being. He reached out for my hand, and when our fingers touched, I felt an electric spark. "I've thought about this, about what it would be like if we explored it, but it's risky," he said, his voice low and intense. "I know," I replied, my voice almost a whisper. "But what if it could be something more?" He fell silent for a moment, as though considering it, then nodded. "Maybe we should see what it feels like, just a little." My heart raced at his words. "Okay," I said eagerly. But just as the moment seemed to reach its peak, my phone buzzed again. It was a message from my mom. "I'm on my way home. Can't wait to see you both." A chill ran down my spine. "Dad, she's coming back," I said, panic rising in my chest. He quickly pulled his hand away, and we both sat up straighter, trying to act casual. "We'll talk later," he whispered urgently. I stood up, feeling a mix of excitement and fear as I prepared for my mom's return. The spark between us was still alive, but now it felt like a secret hanging in the air, waiting to be uncovered. When Mom finally came through the door, she greeted us with her usual warmth, completely unaware of what had just transpired. "What were you two talking about?" she asked, smiling with curiosity. "Nothing much," my dad answered, but I could see the tightness in his shoulders. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. We ate dinner and talked about small, everyday things, but my mind was a whirlpool. What would happen next? Would we ever talk about what almost happened? That night, after my mom went to bed, I found myself sitting alone in the living room, my heart still pounding. The atmosphere felt charged again, and I wondered if that connection would ever be the same between my dad and me. Just as I was about to head to bed, I heard a soft knock on my door. When I opened it, my dad was standing there, looking nervous but determined. "Can we talk?" he asked quietly. I nodded, my heart racing, as I led him into my room. We sat together on the edge of my bed, and the air between us felt even heavier now. "Listen," he said in a low voice. "I know things have felt weird lately, and I don't want to mess everything up, but I can't ignore this feeling anymore." "I don't want to ruin anything either," I replied, feeling the rush of emotions inside me. "But I can't control how I feel." He stared at me intently, and I could feel the heat building between us. "What if we keep this between us, just for a little longer?" A surge of excitement rushed through me at the idea. "Okay," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. But before anything else could happen, a loud noise from outside startled us both. It sounded like a car screeching to a halt, and my heart dropped. "Dad, what was that?" I asked, panic rising again. "Let's check it out," he said, standing up. We moved cautiously toward the window, my heart racing in my chest. I peered out and saw a familiar figure stumbling out of a car, Mom's sister, Aunt Carol. She was supposed to be away for the weekend. What was she doing here? My dad froze, panic flashing across his face. "What's she doing here?" he muttered, clearly caught off guard. "Hide," I whispered urgently, and we quickly ducked behind the couch. We watched as Aunt Carol entered, chatting loudly, dragging in bags.
"Surprise."
"I couldn't wait to see you all," she called out cheerfully. I felt my stomach drop, realizing we were trapped. "What are we going to do?" I whispered. My dad glanced at me, the tension clear in his eyes. "We have to act normal. Just play it cool." We both tried to breathe calmly as Aunt Carol bustled around, completely unaware of the storm brewing between us. As she chattered away, I could feel the weight of our unspoken words hanging in the air. Finally, Aunt Carol went into the kitchen to put away her bags, giving us a brief moment of peace. "Do you think she'll figure it out?" I asked, my heart still pounding. "I hope not," he replied in a low voice. "But we'll need to be careful." At that moment, Aunt Carol returned with a plate of cookies. "You two look so serious," she said, plopping down next to us. "What are you talking about?" My dad quickly masked his expression with a smile. "Just some old memories," he said smoothly. "Oh, good." Aunt Carol laughed. "I love it when you two reminisce. You're the best duo." I felt a strange mix of frustration and amusement. Could she really not feel the tension? We spent the rest of the evening making small talk, but every time my dad brushed against me, the familiar spark between us was undeniable, and it drove me crazy trying to keep our secret hidden when all I wanted to do was explore the feelings we'd shared. Eventually, Aunt Carol excused herself to get settled in, and my dad turned to me with a look of urgency in his eyes. "We need to talk," he whispered, glancing toward the kitchen. I nodded, and we quickly slipped into my room, closing the door behind us. "What if she finds out?" I asked, my voice shaky. "She won't," he said firmly, determination clear in his eyes. "But we can't keep going like this forever. We need to figure this out." My heart raced as I nodded. "What do we do?" "We take it slow. Just keep it between us for now," he said with resolve. "Okay," I replied, feeling a mix of excitement and nerves. But just as we were about to sit down, a loud knock came at the door, followed by Aunt Carol's voice calling out, "Hey, you two." Everything okay in there? We froze, exchanging panicked glances. Yeah, just a minute. I called back, trying to sound casual. Okay, just checking, she replied, and I heard her footsteps fade down the hall. We both let out a sigh of relief, but the tension remained thick between us. This is going to be complicated, I said quietly. Yeah, but we can handle it, my dad responded, his gaze locked onto mine. I trust you, I whispered, feeling vulnerable in that moment as we sat together. Before we could say anything else, Aunt Carol popped her head into the room with a grin. Are you guys ready for movie night? She asked brightly. Frustration flared inside me, but I managed to smile. Sure, let's do it, I said, hiding my disappointment. We joined Aunt Carol in the living room, but as the movie played, I couldn't help but steal glances at my dad. The tension crackled between us, and it was clear we were both thinking the same thing. As the credits rolled, Aunt Carol yawned. I'm going to hit the hay, she said. You two should get some rest too. Good night, we both echoed. As soon as she disappeared down the hall, my heart raced again. Now what? I asked, my breath catching in my throat. We wait for the right moment, he replied, his eyes intense. Just as I turned to leave, Aunt Carol peeked back in. Everything all right? She asked, a hint of suspicion in her voice. Yeah, we're fine, I shot back, my heart pounding. Once she left, I whispered to my dad. What are we going to do? Stay calm, he said. We'll figure it out. The next few days felt like walking a tightrope. One afternoon, when Aunt Carol was out, I found my dad sitting at the kitchen table. Dad, we need to talk, I said, my voice trembling. He set down his newspaper, concern furrowing his brow. What about? About us, I said, my heart pounding in my chest. I can't stop thinking about it. Neither can I, he admitted, leaning in closer. But, Aunt Carol, maybe we can take a chance, I suggested, my breath quickening. He hesitated, then nodded. Okay. Just a kiss. Just as our lips were about to touch, Aunt Carol's voice rang out from the door. Hey, are you two okay out here? We froze, our hearts racing, and pulled apart. Yeah, we're fine, I called out, panic creeping up in my voice. Once she left, I turned to my dad, urgency overtaking me. We can't keep hiding this. Yes, he said, determination in his eyes. Let's tell her. When we returned inside, my heart was thumping loudly. Aunt Carol, we need to talk, I said, my voice steady. What about? She asked, furrowing her brow. About how we feel, I replied, my breath catching in my throat. Her eyes widened in shock. Wait, you mean? Yes, my dad confirmed, his voice low. We want to explore this, but we don't want to hurt you. A heavy silence settled as the realization dawned on her. I never saw this coming, she whispered. I know, I said desperately, but it's tearing us apart. I need time to think, she said, her voice trembling, and she walked away. What have we done? I whispered to my dad. He took a deep breath, his voice serious. We've opened a door we can't close. Now we face the consequences. And just like that, I understood. Our leap had changed everything, and nothing would ever be the same again.